Okay, let's go ahead and get started. It is 1 p.m. here in Pacific time. My name is Amy Defoe. I'm one of the science teachers here at Graduation Alliance. Thanks for joining today in the Science Live session. Today we're going to be looking at the topic of natural selection. And then we'll be looking at the skill of making predictions and why they are important. Last week we started on talking about evolution, and so I wanted to continue on to that next step going into natural selection. Thank you for everybody for joining in here today. A couple of housekeeping items before we go ahead and get started. Thanks for joining. These sessions are being recorded. It's being recorded right now, and this is because we know that life is happening and you can't always make these times in these sessions, and so we record them so that you can view them at another time that's more beneficial and appropriate for you. We also record these because maybe we go through something in this lesson that you want to come back on, that we answered one of your questions and you want to go back and review what I showed you or what we talked about. And so you can do that. Also, as you're thinking about all these courses here at Graduation Alliance, we're making this collection, like a big library of these live sessions and all the different courses and the content levels as well. And so you can come back as you change and you go to a new course or you get farther along in the course, you're able to come back and view these recordings as you go through your schooling here at Graduation Alliance. So lots of good reasons that they are recorded. Also, let's see, you do have the option to turn your microphone on and turn your microphone off. So you can, of course, mute yourself and unmute yourself. I think it's great. I love feedback. I love interaction during these live sessions. So definitely feel free to speak out loud, answer questions, ask questions. It's always good to get that student-teacher interaction here in our school community. You can also use the chat function. You can type in if you want to respond to a question, or if you want to ask a question, you can type if that's easier or a better fit for you. Please, you're more than welcome to do so. During the live session, I'll pop through and I'll keep a look on that chat box to see, if any comments or questions come in as we do this. Also, with your microphone, it's always nice if you've got some background noise going on, just mute yourself so that it doesn't come through on the recording and come through on the session and kind of disturb what's going on here. So great, thanks for joining. I hope, again, this live session is beneficial for you. Anytime that we do these live sessions, I always tell my students, hey, if you've got a topic that you would like to hear more information about, if you want me to cover a concept, an activity, I would love to do a lesson on that for you at the next live session. So, of course, during this session, you can give me some feedback, or if you want to send me a chat or an email throughout the week as you're moving through science and saying, oh, I think it would be good if we had something on this, that would be great. Okay, so let's see. What other thing, as we talk about, science teachers here at Graduation Alliance, I may be your science teacher and I may not be, but as we talk about our courses in science, we're all teaching the same thing. And so even if I'm not your teacher, I will still be able to help you answer questions, go over the material that you might need as well. Okay, so let's take a look at our agenda for today. I always like to break my sessions up into kind of 4 little parts here. And the first one usually turns into be the bigger part, but that's okay. I am going to talk today about natural selection. So I'm going to take what we did on evolution and I'm going to extend it into natural selection. After that, we'll have an opportunity where you can ask questions if you have a particular assignment or a topic, and it could be in earth science, it could be in biology or another course. That would be an opportunity for you to get that, fast, quick, one-on-one response time here. And then I'll talk a little bit about predictions, and I'll show you some examples of predictions that we make, and then we'll look at an actual prediction activity that goes along with natural selection today. And then we'll end, of course, with questions to make sure you are good and ready to move on in your week. So, sounds good. That is our agenda. Let's go ahead and get going here. So, talking about natural selection. Have you ever heard of natural selection, or maybe this term, survival of the fittest? Any thoughts on what that means or what that could be about? We did include a picture in there, maybe to help get those wheels turning, activate some background knowledge here. Natural selection, survival of the fittest. Good, yep, so you're always gonna think, survival of the fittest, the strongest is gonna survive, right? The weak are going to not be able to survive. So like, look at this picture here, we've got a couple different organisms. You can see here, we've got prey and predator going on here. So as we talk about survival of the fittest, these guys are trying to run away from their predator. I think it's a cheetah. And we know that, whichever one is going to be the fastest is going to survive. So the ones that are most fit to, their environment or the surroundings are going to be able to survive. Okay, so survival of the fittest, the strongest ones, the organisms that are best suited to their environment are going to be the ones that survive. And as they survive, then they will reproduce and pass on those genes or variations that make them the best, the most fit for that environment. Does that make sense? And that's just a little throw it out here, get you thinking about this topic. We, of course, are going to go through more. Okay. So natural selection is the mechanism behind evolution. This is how species change over time. We're going to look at what makes an organism change over time and how that helps it survive in its environment. Okay. So as we talked about before in evolution, we're talking about how organisms change over a very, very, very long period of time. Very slowly they change. And the reason why they change is what we call natural selection. So that's what that means by natural selection is the mechanism behind evolution. So it's kind of the reason, how it happens, so to speak, okay? So as we look here at this picture, you guys see what kind of organism that is? It's kind of hard to see. This is, of course, is the evolution of what we know as a giraffe. Okay, and you're probably looking at this one over here and you're like, okay, that one, yeah, that looks like a giraffe. And as you start off here, you're looking at it going, I don't know. You can see some similarities, but again, here we go. Evolution, how the organism has changed over time. And the reason for that is natural selection. A giraffe, think about it. What does a giraffe eat? Think about where a giraffe lives. Do you think that's a place that has an abundance of food? Probably not. So as you think about it, we think of, the continent of Africa, we're thinking about some savannas, lots of grasses, maybe some trees in there, but then there's also going to be periods of time where maybe it's dry, food becomes scarce. So you're having lots of competition over this food. So as we think about what a giraffe eats, well, they eat, leaves. So they eat plants. So as we look at, how this organism has progressed, we can all assume that we can tell, it's that neck, it's the length of that organism. It is continuously gotten taller and taller, okay? And the reason for that is because they need to be able to get food in a way that maybe other organisms aren't getting the food. So as we think about it, most organisms, we're thinking we're down here at this type of a level, whereas anything about what they're feeding on. They're feeding on, what's in the grass. They're feeding on these shrubs. But this giraffe has this nice little kind of niche option here to be able to reach high up into those trees to get the leaves that maybe the other organisms can't get. Even if you think about it, within their species of just the giraffe, the tallest giraffe is going to be the one that is able to reach the leaves up in the tree. So even the competition between each one of these, which one's going to be able to eat? It's going to be the one that can reach up and get that food we all have to eat to survive, to better, they're going to be able to get that food so that they can continue to grow, continue to sustain life. Energy needs that. And these taller ones are then going to survive. And what's going to happen is they're going to reproduce. So these giraffes that are taller have characteristics of being taller, are going to reproduce, and they're going to pass on those genes for tallness. Now, as we think about the ones that maybe are shorter, they can only reach these branches here. Well, there's no food here. You don't eat, you die. So these organisms maybe that aren't as tall, they're going to have problems finding food. They could become sick. They could die from not getting food. And again, that's the whole idea of survival of the fittest. The organism that is best suited to its environment is going to be able to survive and pass on those genes to the next generation. Okay. So as we think about why evolution occurs, it's because organisms are adapting to their surroundings, to their environment, to better suit the needs of it. And we know that environments can change over time as well. Okay, so let's go back a little bit to Darwin here. In 1831, Charles Darwin embarked on the HMS Beagle voyage. That was that big, long boat trip that he took, and he took all these observations all along the way of the organisms that he saw. The biggest point about that trip was what he viewed, what he observed on the Galapagos Islands. We think off of the coast of South America, on the west side, off the coast of Ecuador. We're looking at these, very protected, secluded islands, the Galapagos. He summarized his findings and his observations in field books and diaries, and he later published a very, very important and famous book on the origin of the species. And this is back in 1859, and people were still reading this book and using it. It was from this work that the idea of evolution through natural selection came to be. So natural selection means, I'm going over this again, that organisms with traits best suited to their environments are more likely to survive and reproduce. Darwin's observations and thoughts can be summed up as this. There is variation in nature. Many more offsprings are generated than can survive. Therefore, there's a struggle for life, in which favorable variations are preserved and unfavorable variations are removed. So let's explain that. Okay, variation is in nature. So as we think about it, just think about our species of humans, okay? Variations, we all look different. We're different heights. We have different measurements, different hair color, different eye color, different shapes of our nose. These are all types of variations, okay? Same thing with all other organisms. More offspring are generated than can survive. So as you think about organisms, they produce more, they have more babies or produce more offspring than will be able to survive in that environment. Therefore, the ones that are best suited, the ones that have the best variations or characteristics are going to be the ones that survive. The ones that maybe aren't as favorable, they're not going to survive, and then they'll end up dying. So the ones that are favorable then pass on those genes, those favorable variations to the next generation. Those unfavorable variations die out. So slowly, the organisms are slowly changing through this process. So as you think about that giraffe, the ones that are taller, and think about the variations, they're all very different in height, okay? The taller one's going to be able to get that food. So this is going to be the one that survives. This is going to be the one that passes on, reproduces, and passes on these traits for tallness. So over time, the giraffes are going to continue to get taller and taller and taller. There are 4 major principles that go along with natural selection. And it's kind of what Darwin said, but they summarize it here. So number 1, there's differences, variations occur among all the individuals of a species. Again, we're all different. Variations are passed on to the offspring. Okay? So organisms are all different. The variations come from parent passed on to the offspring. Some variations are going to be helpful. Tallness in that giraffe. Individuals with helpful variations survive and reproduce better than those without the variations. Over time, the offspring of individuals with helpful variations make up more of that population because they're able to survive. Eventually, this can become, this is how we talk about branching off, this is how a new or a separate species could occur. Okay, the 5th principle, and they kind of put it in there, all species, again, produce more offspring than will survive. This allows for the organisms that are best suited to have a better chance of survival. Okay. Any questions on that so far? Okay. So let's take a look at this little scenario here. Imagine that there are brown beetles and green beetles where you live. The beetles have had babies all year long, but many are eaten by birds. The pictures show a progression of what occurs. What do you think, which do you think the birds prefer? So as you look at these three pictures, so let's start. Here's our starting point, and here's our ending point, thinking about this population of beetles. Again, variation. So as you can tell, they all have different colors. Some are more brown, some are more green. Okay. Over time, we notice that there's more brown. Until where we are now, green is no longer existing. So which do you think the birds prefer to eat? The green beetles or the brown beetles? Okay, definitely, the birds prefer to eat those green ones because, of course, there's no more green ones. So as you think about, the variation here, which one is selected for, okay? These brown beetles must be maybe camouflaged or blend into their surroundings, so their variation allows them to survive in their environment. Whereas maybe these green ones, think maybe they're on the bark of a tree or something, and the birds can see them. So that definitely can make it a little bit more, the birds are going to go to the ones that are the easier to prey upon. Welcome, we're just talking about evolution here today and natural selection. So I'm looking at this example here of some beetles looking at a population. Okay, so again, as we start, we've got lots of variation. And then as generations pass on, the ones that have the more favorable traits are going to be the ones that survive and continue to reproduce and pass on those favorable traits. So over time, this population of beetles has become brown beetles. Okay. So for natural selection to occur, there are some requirements. There's two requirements. There has to be variation within a population. Has to be. Okay, so you can't have all the organisms that are exactly the same. We know that that's not the case when it comes to organisms because, we think about all of our DNA and our genes. They are all different, okay? So there must be variation within a population and that there must be a selection that takes place in that environment. So there's got to be some type of a factor in that environment that the variation would be beneficial to or unbeneficial to. So maybe it's the type of food that the organism eats. Maybe there's a lot of predators that they have to run from. So there has to be some type of selection that takes place in that environment where those characteristics and that variation are going to allow one to be more favorable or other. So as you think about, as we've been talking about the giraffe, the giraffe, we're going to think about the variation of that population of giraffes is going to be their height. The selection that takes place in that environment is, well, the giraffes need to eat food. Food can be pretty scarce, so there's lots of competition for food. So the ones that are taller are able to get that food that is higher up in those trees. Okay. It's the differences within a species that allow for survival for the ones that are selected. So in the last lesson, you looked at green and brown beetles, so in that last little slide. And this population, color is the variation. The predator, which of course is the bird, preferred to eat the green beetles. Maybe they tasted better, perhaps they were more easily seen, easier to prey upon. The selection is the bird eating the green beetles instead of the brown beetles. So there's something in that environment that is making the bird choose the green ones over the brown. So they're being selected to be preyed upon. Okay. Okay, I'm going to put this slide in here, give you another little example looking at the characteristics for natural selection. It's a little bit blurry, but I'll go over it here for you. So again, we think about overpopulation. All species produce more individuals than can survive. That gives us that variation, knowing that the ones that are best suited to that environment are going to survive. So again, we've got lots of offspring, more than are able to, live in that environment. Variation, you can see already in here the different sizes, different colors, maybe the horns. That's going to give variation within those species. Selection, something in the environment is going to select the characteristics of the organisms, and they're going to be better suited to that environment. Maybe it's the coloring. Maybe they're able to blend into the surroundings, and so that's going to be a selection for them. Over time, they're going to adapt. So the organisms that are selected for or have the more favorable traits are then going to be able to survive and reproduce, and they're going to pass on those favorable traits. So over time, that population is going to change. Okay, can you think of ways an organism can be selected for, or what might make them survive, be the fittest in their environment? When you think of ways an organism can be selected for or best suited to its environment. I put in a couple of pictures here, kind of give you some ideas. Yeah, Katrina, you have a comment? You're welcome to unmute yourself, or if you want to type in the chat, up to you.
Organisms can do like different characteristics, like in like your DNA and something.
Yeah. So again, that's going to give us the type of, we're going to get variations from that. Totally. Which is going to make them better suited to their environment depending on what it is. So we can look here, I put in a couple of examples like camouflage. So if we think about this, snow owl here, think about the environment that they live in. If this owl was, a more normal brown colored owl, and it lived in this type of an environment that was covered in snow and ice, it'd stick out, but because this organism, the coloring of it allows the organism to blend into their surroundings, camouflaging them, kind of making them better suited to that environment so that they can survive. We also talked about the height of an organism in the case of the giraffe. We also used the example of, which organisms can, in a population, the ones that are faster, maybe they have, the way that their legs are shaped or the length of their muscles allow them to be a faster runner to get away from prey or get away from their predators. They're going to be able to survive and pass on those characteristics that make them favorable. Some organisms, they, like a zebra, they think about the striping on them. That's a characteristic that allows them to survive in their environment. Because of course, a predator would see this and be like, is it one, is it two, which one am I going to? And so it would run at the organisms, and then the zebras would disperse out. Okay, we're going to look at a couple more examples here in the next little section, but that's what I have on natural selection for right now before we get to prediction. But I wanted to open it up to questions if you have any questions about what we just talked about, or if you have a question about maybe where you're at in your program, in your course, if there was an activity or a concept or a topic that you want me to talk a little bit more, this is your opportunity. I always like to give a little pause, give you a chance to think about it, collect your thoughts. Again, I'm here to help you. So please don't ever feel like, oh, I don't want to ask a question. That's what we're here for, okay? And I will offer another opportunity for questions at the end of the session too. So don't feel like you don't have more chances to ask questions. Okay. Well, then let's move right into predictions. So going along with natural selection and evolution, we're going to talk about predictions. And of course, we know that predictions occur everywhere, not just in science. So what is a prediction? A prediction is a guess about what might happen in the future based on observations that you make either in the past or now. Predicting is closely related to other processes such as observing, inferring, taking the information in, and classifying. Many process skills are in fact dependent on other skills. So we usually make predictions based off of our observations or what we have already been taught or have taken in, already know. So again, we're using these skills kind of all together to predict a guess of what might happen in the future. So examples of predictions, you think about it in daily life. We're predicting all the time and we don't even really think about it. Just, it comes naturally. You wake up in the morning, you're getting ready for your day. Maybe you're off to work off to run errands. Then you think about it. You look outside quickly and you're like, it's cloudy. Maybe I should, bring a rain jacket with me. Maybe I should wear a jacket today. So we make quick predictions every day in our lives. If I flip the switch, I predict the light will turn on. These are things that we're doing without even thinking about it. We just, based on what we've seen before, what we already know, we know that they're going to happen. Predictions, we've got dependable predictions. This is when we discover patterns and observations that help you make that dependable prediction. I can think about with my, my kiddos, I can continue to discover patterns about, maybe their eating habits and what it is that they like and how come they don't eat some days and sometimes they eat a lot. So I can make these observations and kind of predict what kind of food they're going to eat, how much they're going to get over a period of time. Reliability and dependability in predictions allows people to plan out for future events. So, thinking about, in day-to-day life, planning out, how much food you might need, or planning out, the weather. But of course, we also know that, in science, we make a little bit more precise predictions as we think about, thinking in earth science, as we're thinking about, the seasons. We can predict the seasons based off of, the observations. And now, of course, we've got technology to show us how those seasons are occurring. When we make a prediction, we use our senses to observe and we collect information. So we use our senses like, what we see, what we hear. Okay? We notice any patterns through classification, and we make that connection to what we already know. So we're activating our background knowledge. We predict what we think will happen in the future based on these things. So again, predictions are occurring so many times throughout our day, and we don't even think about it. They come natural. So how do we use this in our daily life or in science? Like I talked about, weather, what to wear. Or planning an event. Maybe you want to do a picnic outside. You got to think about using prediction. Think, is this going to be a good idea to have a picnic outside? Storms, making those predictions on when when you should stay home, or, when it's just not safe to go outside at that point in time. So making those observations over time, using information that you already have about storms and safety, and making that decision. As we talk about earthquakes, in earth science, we talk about these natural events that occur. We can look back on what has occurred in Earth's history, and we can't say precisely like, oh, an earthquake is going to happen. It's been, 30 years. It's going to happen right on this particular day. We can't make that type of precise prediction, but we can look back on history and see these patterns that the Earth goes through. And we could say, yeah, if an earthquake is usually a big earthquake is usually occurring, every 100 years, that we probably should expect and predict that another one will be happening and be ready for it. Same thing with volcanoes, predictions when we test in school, of course, when you're thinking about you're taking a test, and maybe it's a multiple choice question, you want to make predictions based off of those. You kind of go through divvying up which ones are right and wrong, and then kind of making that prediction which is going to be the best answer. Okay, so to make prediction, again, some process skills that we go through is we use our background knowledge. In science, we use, the past is the key to the future. What that means is looking back at Earth's history, we can see what occurs. So over, the history of Earth's billions of years, we can see events that have happened and know that this is kind of a cycle, that it's going to continue to happen again. So what that means is that we look to Earth's history to predict what will happen in the future, and we prepare for it. Storms, earthquakes, volcanoes, different seasons. So we know these things have occurred. We've gathered background information about Earth's history, about how often these occur, what maybe some signs are that these could be occurring soon, and we use that to predict and prepare for in the future. Okay, so in activity 5.2.1, this is an Earth Science. This is Natural Selection Unit 5. we get the story of these peppered moths. And with the peppered moths, let me make sure, with the peppered moth, we're talking about in the Industrial Revolution, the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in London. And you can tell here we've got some variation between the different colored moths. So some are lighter and some are darker. We also have environments that are different. And as you think about an Industrial Revolution, we're talking about, coal being burned and used, and it's not very clean. So I'm going to leave you with that, and we're going to go back into that question here in a moment. Okay, so in activity 521, it first starts off going back to those beetles again. There are two types of beetles, those that are brown and those that are green. The beetles that had the beetles have had babies all year long, and many have been eaten by the birds. So the pictures kind of show a progression of what has happened in that population of beetles over that year. So as we look at first, what is the variation? What is the variation of these beetles? What makes them different? Yeah, and it is the color. So we've got green beetles and we've got brown beetles. So the variation in this population of beetles is going to be the color. Which beetle is selected for according to the natural selection theory? What will happen to each color of beetle? Well, as we look at, as we start, the bird is preying upon the green ones. So the bird prefers or selects the green beetle. Maybe, like we said before, they taste better. I think it has to do with camouflage, blending in. They're easier to prey upon. So the brown beetles are selected to survive because they're best suited to their environment to live. So they're able to not be eaten by the birds. So over time, the brown are going to survive, pass on their genes for brown variation. The green beetles are going to be eaten, not going to survive, not pass on their genes. So over time, more and more of these beetles are going to be brown. Okay, so going back to those moths. Again, we're talking about London, England here, Industrial Revolution. So coal was being produced in these big factories. You can probably think about it back in this time, you've seen pictures of it, kind of eerie and dark. Lots of, when coals burn, it produces soot, like this brown, black, thick, coal. And that covers, as it's produced out, it emits out into the air, that smoke and that smog, and little particles of ash are going to fall to the ground. And what happens here is, this is what the trees looked like before Industrial Revolution. It was a lighter colored bark. Then, as Industrial Revolution took place and more coal was being burned, the bark got covered with that soot, making them darker. So, as you can think, if you were a bird and you preyed upon moths, which one would you eat? In this scenario of pre-Industrial Revolution, you definitely eat this one. It sticks out. Whereas these lighter colored moths are able to blend in to that bark, into the surroundings, kind of protecting them, making them survival of the fittest, best selected for that environment. These guys, easier to get. Birds are going to eat them. But again, as coal was being used and burned, the bark of the trees began to get covered, and they were darker and darker and darker, and it flipped. So now we've got these darker moths that are, more camouflage. They blend into their surroundings. So the birds are going to end up eating the ones that stick out, the lighter colored ones. So this is an example of how natural selection, it's flip-flop, back and forth. Okay. So in the peppered moth scenario, the variation is the coloring. Okay. So the color of the moths. The selection is going to be able to, the selection is which was able to be camouflaged. And it depends on, what period of time that you're at, pre-Industrial Revolution or during Industrial Revolution. Pre, you're going to have these ones, the darker ones are going to be eaten. During Industrial Revolution, the lighter ones are going to be eaten. What do you think would happen to the population of pepper moths once coal use decreased and the trees no longer were covered in soot? So here we go into that prediction. Okay, we saw what it was originally like. We saw how it changed and what the variation of the organisms, how they were affected. Now, let's say, and this has actually happened, what would you predict would happen if coal was no longer used or used a whole lot less, and we weren't producing the soot on the bark, and the bark began to go back to its natural state, it was healthier, the coloring changed? What do you think would happen to the moths? Which ones would survive? Which ones would be selected for in that type of environment? You're right, it would go back to these lighter colored moths, would be the ones that would be survive best suited to their environment, because again, the bark of the tree would go back to being that natural lighter looking color. So now we're going to have the darker moths are going to stick out. They're going to be the ones that are going to be preyed upon. The lighter colored ones are going to be able to blend in, harder to find, survive, and pass on those traits for a lighter color. So over time, we can see how the populations can change. And again, we can use prediction to predict what will occur. Okay, that's what I have today on predictions. Does anybody have any questions about what we just talked about with the peppered moss, or another topic in science, maybe wherever you're at in your science course, or a question that you have about an activity that you'd like to go over? Okay. Well, please remember that your teachers here at Graduation Alliance, we are here to help you guys. We'll help you succeed, get through your courses, get your credits, and be able to move on and meet your goals. So please, if you ever have questions or you get stuck and you're getting frustrated, don't let that happen. Reach out to us, chat, email, whatever mode of communication is your preference. Please continue to use that. Also, as you're thinking about these live sessions, if you have an idea for a topic or you want me to cover, I would be happy, and I would appreciate to get that feedback for you, thinking about next week. Everybody have a great week and good luck in science, and let us know if you have any questions. Take